What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the PFN Scouting Podcast. It's over. It's done. The NFL Draft is in the rear view mirror. We had so many podcasts in the lead up to it, breaking down every possible angle. You could go back and listen to those, but it's kind of moot now. We're in the rear view mirror. We're past it. And today we have a full NFL Draft recap episode here with my good friend Derek Tate, scouting fantasy analyst. Derek, how you doing, my man? You got some time to sleep a little bit, recharge? I know the grades, especially on that day 3, they come in fast. We got to stay up to date with it. How you doing?
This is the first time I've ever had to cover the NFL Draft from like a journalistic capacity. And boy, is it crazy over here at PFN. But we did a lot of great work. It was a fantastic team effort from top to bottom. You were leading the charge, kind of the 101 of the group when it comes to our draft coverage. But no, I mean, it was fast. It was furious. It was cool, but you couldn't hang on any pick too long because we were looking forward to the next one and analyzing that. So a lot happened. Now we have a little bit of time to digest it and talk about it in a bit more detail here on this PFN Scouting Podcast. A real pleasure. Looking forward to this one.
Yes, sir. And I feel like everything starts in round 1. So, and real quick, for those of you who are listening, just thank you for sticking with us through the entire offseason. It was a grueling stretch at times. It's a grind. It always is. And we had some changes here at the PFN Scouting Podcast, but I want to give a shout out to Derek live on air here for taking the charge and really providing, being the best co-host I could ask for down the stretch. So thank you, Derek. And we've got a lot of NFL Draft content still to come. We're going to be transitioning to 2025 here at some point. I'm already working on getting my scouting interface set up for that. So that'll be fun. But in the meantime, we'll recap the NFL Draft of 2024 NFL Draft. And it feels right to start with round 1 because that's where everything precipitates off of. That's kind of where things start and where the dominoes start to fall. So Derek, watching round 1, obviously there's a lot of build up to that particular day. All of those are on the same night. What stood out to you? Just general takeaways from round 1. What stood out? Good, bad? What kind of caught your eye?
The lack of trades within the first 5 picks. I mean, we were talking and speculating for a while that, the Arizona Cardinals were in the catbird spot. They would love to maybe trade back a little bit if a team wanted to move up and get J.J. McCarthy. I was like, okay, well, if McCarthy's there at 5, I definitely think Harbaugh is trading out of that 5 spot. We didn't have any trades until the 10th pick. Yeah. But we have to start with, in the top 10, there was one pick that is just absolutely head scratching, baffling, befuddling, puzzling, whatever word you want to use to describe you being confused. It was the Atlanta Falcons investing the number 8 overall pick in Michael Penix Jr. Look, I like Penix. I do think that he was kind of a late first round, early second type of QB prospect. But, his extensive experience in college, he's going to be 24 years old heading into his rookie season, and had all kinds of durability issues back at Indiana. We've discussed those before. But the Atlanta Falcons in particular, they just paid Kirk Cousins $100 million guaranteed. It's up to $180 million over a 4-year span for Kirk Cousins, a veteran quarterback, because that signals to me that the Atlanta Falcons think that they have a roster that could compete and make some noise in the NFC postseason picture in 2024. So, and you knew you were picking at 8 this whole time. If you wanted Michael Penix, he was probably going to be there at 8. But why would you pay Kirk Cousins all this money, and he's coming off of an Achilles injury, to draft Penix at 8? I don't think, I know we're going to talk about a lot of teams that we thought had great drafts. I think that there was one definitive team that didn't really feel like they had a plan, because the Atlanta Falcons, they pay a veteran quarterback. You think they're going to try to make that roster better this year, and they spent top 10 draft capital on a player that is likely not going to see the field until the 2026 NFL season in an ideal scenario if Kirk Cousins works out and plays to the level that they expected when they paid him $100 million guaranteed.
Yep. That's the key, right? That's the key. And we're starting off with the Falcons because that one does catch the eye more than any selection, right? It just it was so surprising to me. And here's the question that you have to ask with the Falcons pick, right? Because they clearly liked Michael Penix Jr. a lot. And I think one thing that we can look back on now, we were talking about this on our draft preview, right? It's probably that top 4 group of quarterbacks, right? J.J. McCarthy, and McCarthy was the QB5 off the board, right? So, looking back, the gap between McCarthy and then Penix and Nix as the top veteran quarterbacks might have been a lot smaller in the NFL than it was in the media, right? So that's a dichotomy that we can now analyze looking back in hindsight. But the key with Michael Penix Jr., right? Because you mentioned it, you hit the nail on the head. They just signed Kirk Cousins to a massive deal. Kirk Cousins, before the Achilles injury, was playing very well last year, like a top 10 QB. So this is a guy, if you're confident that he can get back to 100%, he can help you win now. That 8th overall pick, you can use that on a player like Rome Odunze or Dallas Turner or Laiatu Latu, players at positions of need for the Falcons. After Drake London, they have Darnell Mooney, who's a great complementary threat, but you could use a lot more still in that weapons core, I think, to complete that. On the defensive side, you still need that edge rusher who can really change the defensive scheme. I don't think they got that this year. They had an opportunity to get one. Instead, you get Michael Penix Jr., who, don't get me wrong, right? There are a lot of elements to it. One element is Kirk Cousins, his recovery. Let's say he's not recovering as quickly as you'd like to, right? Because that is notable. But this guy that you pick a number 8 overall has to be a guy where you're thinking, we got to pick him now because we might not get a comparable QB prospect 2 or 3 years down the road. That's the only argument that you can make to pick this guy. I don't think Michael Penix Jr. is that kind of prospect. That's where the disconnect comes for me, because 33rd overall player on my board personally, right? I can see the cosmetic arguments for it, right? He's a very good vertical athlete. He ran a 4.5, I think, in the 40-yard dash, somewhere around there. The arm strength, the drive velocity, those are elite qualities. And the competitive toughness, the leadership ability, no one is disputing that. And I think those are the exact kind of qualities that a front office could fall in love with and then take him prematurely, right? So I think we saw that happen, but composite, overall, was he the caliber of prospect to warrant passing on all of this talent that could have helped you win now with Kirk Cousins? I don't think he was. And then now you pass up that opportunity to get a blue chip player for your roster. That could set you back, and that could really close your window a little quicker. And then now, Michael Penix, you mentioned it too. He's probably not, if things do work out with Cousins, Penix probably won't play for 3 or 4 years. If things don't work out with Cousins, Penix does play earlier, but you also don't have as much talent to incubate his growth, right? So it's a catch-22. For me, it feels like they're 1 foot in and 1 foot out now. And that's exactly where you didn't want to be, right? And I think that, I don't know, it's tough for me to see it ending in a positive note for the Falcons, right? Because Penix as a passer, right, we can talk about him being a veteran, being experienced, being talented, but he still has a lot of work to do with his situational precision, right? With his creative capacity. He's a little stiff in the hips. That can impact his upside there. And I don't know. He just wasn't that caliber prospect for me. It was
first off, it was a reach. Yeah. And what makes it worse is that you address the position in the offseason by paying market value for a quarterback coming off of a devastating injury. And that's why when I was doing my grades for the Atlanta Falcons, I was like, as far as a reach goes in position of need, this is an F. Do I think that Penix is a good player that could eventually, be your franchise quarterback down the road? Sure. That's why I gave it a D+, but I was being very generous. Yeah. And Terry Fontenot, the GM of the Atlanta Falcons, he's like, well, he could sit for 4 or 5 years. Please tell somebody that he's going to have to go ahead and pick up his 5th-year option if he sits the entire duration of Kirk Cousins' contract.
The whole point of the rookie contract is having that cheap contract to go off. So you could play Kirk Cousins for 2 or 3 years and then get a rookie QB. So you have that timeline. That was the key with the Penix pick. Not only was it a reach on the value board, but it just didn't fit their timeline at all. And now they're kind of stuck in that. So yeah, we can say so many things about it. The redeeming qualities are that he is talented. He is a very good leader. He is competitive. I think there is a scenario where he can be successful, but looking at what the Falcons needed right now, they didn't need a rookie QB right now. And they passed up an opportunity to get a really good player at another position that they needed. So,
as a Buccaneers fan, I'm super happy that the Atlanta Falcons decided to go ahead and draft Michael Penix, because to me, Dallas Turner was the pick. What I believe would have helped their roster the most for this season is to get a hyper athletic, explosive edge pass rushing prospect, and they passed on that. And really, they passed on it in the second round too. Yeah. And we're not going to just do an Atlanta Falcons, draft recap here. But even trading up for Ruka Hora, if I said that correctly, I probably didn't. But you still had Johnny Newton on the on the board. So just a puzzling draft from the Atlanta Falcons across the board.
Yeah, it was difficult. And they did draft Brandon Dorless, who has some snaps, some experience at 7 tech and 9. So he can be a hybrid edge, but I know a lot of teams projected him inside too. So in my opinion, you still left needing more at edge and wide receiver, some premier positions. So we can get in the Falcons a little bit more later, some team specific stuff. Let's keep going across round 1. Let's start with the quarterbacks real quick. Quarterback landing spots. I think most of what we expected did happen. Caleb Williams went number 1. Jaden Daniels. We talked about Daniels and the whole visit fiasco. Probably not mattering, right? He ended up going number 2 to the Commanders. Drake May, number 3 to the Patriots. And JJ McCarthy, number 10 overall to the Vikings. Then Bo Nix went 12th overall, which was pretty surprising as well. But there were a few mock drafts that we did that had him going that high. And I feel like that one's a little more reconcilable because it's a good scheme fit and they needed a QB, right? And they didn't have an opportunity to trade up for one potentially. So get a guy you like if he is there. But what are your thoughts on the QB landing spots and how they fit their respective teams?
Yeah, no, I love it for Caleb Williams. I think that this is probably the best situation a number 1 overall pick has ever stepped into, at least for a quarterback, right? And they compounded that by adding another blue chip, receiver prospect in Roma Dunze at 9 overall. I like it for Jaden Daniels as well. I love what he brings as a runner in that RPO heavy kind of air raidy scheme that Cliff Kingsbury likes to run. And I think he's going to be able to push the ball outside the numbers, Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson. And I like what they did by bringing in Luke McCaffrey and Ben Sinnott as well. So really all of a sudden, I kind of think that this Commanders offense has a little bit of sneaky upside to be, a productive unit in 2024, assuming Daniels comes in and hits the ground running to some extent. Drake May, I know you love who they selected in the second round to give him a weapon, and I'm all about it too. And I'm even very happy that they went and got Javon Baker. I think he was in the 4th round, if I'm not mistaken. So as much as I was concerned about Drake May in particular stepping into that New England offense in 2024, I actually thought the Patriots did a pretty nice job of adding some talented playmakers and who complement what's already there in DeMario Douglas quite well, and think that this Patriots offense can be a little bit better than expected in 2024. So I like the landing spot for Drake May. Of course, JJ McCarthy, great fit there with Kevin O'Connell and all the weapons that they have there in that Minnesota Vikings offense. Bo Nix is the player that now they traded for Zach Wilson. They've got Jarrett Stidham. I expect that at some point, Bo Nix will be the starting quarterback for the Denver Broncos. I just don't know if it's as clean cut as I would like. I wasn't as high on Nix. I had him as my QB6 in this draft. Certainly, I understand some of the things that Nix does well. I could see Sean Payton being a fan of his kind of game that he brings into the NFL, and maybe fitting into Sean Payton's system. The weapons I do have some questions about, like Cortland Sutton's your number 1 right now, Marvin Mims. I know they drafted Estime as well.
They did get Troy Franklin as well, who at least has
Troy Franklin. No, you're absolutely right. And one was slipping my mind there. But yeah, certainly being able to get your top target, who's a very good prospect in his own right, certainly helps. But I still believe that it's going to be a steep learning curve for Bo Nix going from that Oregon offense to Sean Payton's hyper, on script, on time offense with, I'd say, average weapons at very best.
Yeah, for sure. And that was the big thing for the Broncos when we were talking about them in the lead up to the draft, is they're kind of in a tough situation. They're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place where they don't have the capital to, adequately strengthen the roster to the point where you can incubate a rookie's growth, but they also need a QB very badly, right? So it's like, what do they do? What need do you solve right now? And obviously now we're looking back, they chose to get the QB, which is okay. I can understand that for sure. But there is work to keep improving the weapons core, like you said, and the offensive line doesn't have a ton of long-term security, right? Mike McGlinchey was kind of a letdown in his first year as a free agent acquisition. They drafted Nick Gargiulo at center in round 7, who I think could be a gem for them, but still some uncertainty there, right? Garrett Bowles isn't a long-term asset. He's going to be, off a contract pretty soon here. So you do have some uncertainty at the offensive line. The weapons core can improve. Not a lot of tight end either. So, it's one of those positions where, yes, you needed a QB. Can you adequately support him? That's the question that we still haven't answered for them. But let's talk about the QB dichotomy real quick. top 6 in the top 12, which was crazy. And then a QB didn't go off the board again until 150th overall, man. Spencer Rattler. I don't think that there's ever been a gap like that in the NFL draft. That's just insane to me. And I think it's kind of representative of just like, I don't even know what it is represent. I don't know how to analyze it, man, because I thought Rattler would be a day 2 pick probably with the talent. I thought someone was going to try and swipe him up as a developmental starter potentially, but he just kept falling down the board, and then eventually he gets there to number 150. I know there's been some speculation that the impression he left being on that Netflix series QB1 rubbed a lot of GMs the wrong way. That's kind of been the speculation, no confirmation there, but it's crazy how many elements go into it. So the QB position, obviously, looking at this top 6, the one in the top 12, who are you most excited for and who are you most apprehensive about?
Certainly most excited for Caleb Williams. Again, I know there was a lot of speculation and even it felt like some attempts to potentially push him down the board or create some sort of cloud of doubt that he didn't want to be in Chicago, but that all turned out to be, just noise and chatter. Super excited about Caleb Williams. I think the best quarterback prospect. He was the number 1 guy on my board heading into the draft. Landed in a very, very good spot. Very excited about his outlook, even looking into 2024. A little bit hesitant on Bo Nix. Again, I just personally have my specific concerns about Bo Nix. And I'm not as huge a fan of the landing spot. Certainly some will probably pick Drake May because of the lack of overall top end talent at wide receiver and tight end for the New England Patriots. But I'm a believer in Drake May. I think he was a far better prospect as a whole than Bo Nix. So I'm concerned about Bo Nix. Excited for Caleb Williams.
Yeah, I think all those young QBs, there's a lot of excitement, kind of in varying molds, right? With Williams, he can probably hit the ground running right away in 2024. So I'm excited to see what that offense looks like because they have all the pieces in place to support him. Rome Odunze at number 9 overall was incredible. I wasn't sure he was going to be there because I thought maybe the Falcons would take him. They didn't. Right. May going to New England, right? A lot of people were apprehensive about that landing spot, but then you mentioned it, and I got to talk about it. They got Jalen Polk, my guy from Washington, who's a great player, but I think he fits the style of May very well. That's the important part for me. I think Drake May is a player who can anticipate windows. He can throw tight balls. He's not afraid to test tight windows with that arm elasticity and velocity, right? He can get the ball to where only his receiver can get it. And then Jalen Polk is a receiver who's not often claustrophobic at the catch point. Even with the defender inside his frame, very good body control, very good hands, and he knows how to create late snap separation with that explosive athleticism too. So I loved that pick as well. Javon Baker, I remember we talked about him a little bit, and you were concerned about the volatility with his game, which I think getting him in round 4 was probably the optimal value. I think that was the perfect spot to get him because there is still room for him to be a little more consistent. The highs are very high. I mean, he can snag some crazy throws, high difficulty catches on the boundary, outside the numbers, right? You want to be a little more consistent again, but this is a guy who I think does strengthen your rotation and he can separate independently. He's a good blocker as well, good rack threat. So a lot of utility with him that I liked for them. And they got Caden Wallace at offensive tackle, who's talented. Right. I think he could improve his block sustain. He's mainly a right tackle. So can he play left tackle? That's the big question with him. But I do think they invested in the supporting structure, which is all that you could, that's the first thing that you can ask for. So very intrigued by all the QBs, and obviously JJ McCarthy landing with Minnesota. I think it's a great landing spot. He's got all the supporting cast he needs to really hit the ground running and incubate his growth as well. Let's move on from QB now. Round 1, what were some of the more exciting picks for you? I know for me personally, some of the value deals on the defensive side of the ball, because a defensive player didn't go until 15th overall. It was the Colts taking Latu, which, by the way, that's a great scheme. That's a great fit for what they need, right? They haven't had a premier pass rushing threat. They have that now with Latu. I mean, there are times where you'll watch the tape with Latu and it looks like he has a force field. No matter how many times offensive tackles try to strike him, they can't strike cleanly because he's so freaking flexible and slippery as a rusher. And then he's got the bend, he's got the hand usage. I think that'll be a home run pick if he can stay healthy. Dallas Turner going to Minnesota. They traded up to get him. That was a phenomenal pick. I love that fit with Brian Flores. Flores is a maniac and he can unleash Turner. That's going to be great. Terrion Arnold going to the Lions at number 24 overall was phenomenal. Top 10 player for me. I think he's a phenomenal scheme fit. with their heavy man coverage, and he can play the slot if needed, if Brian Branch gets injured. A lot of fun fits. What were some of the top non-QB fits that stood out to you in round one?
No, so you mentioned Latu,
Yeah.
sorry. And boy, oh boy. Like, so we saw different ends of the spectrum as far as defensive approaches, where the first two edge rushers came off the board. The Indianapolis Colts, they do not blitz. I think they blitz like less than 8 or 19% of the snaps in 2023. So they need someone who you can just line up and ask to go win as a pass rusher, to not have to scheme up all kinds of exotic looks. And Latu is that dude. Like, I think he's going to be a great high floor pass rusher, which is exactly what the Indianapolis Colts needed. But then you talk about the fit, 2 picks later, trading up to go and get Dallas Turner. And that's an exciting fit too. I mean, I know that I believe they went and got Jonathan Grenard from the Houston Texans, also Andrew Van Ginkel, who is a nice little flexible, movable piece who provides some pass rushing upside. But yeah, Dallas Turner is a great explosive prospect when you have Brian Flores giving you cover zero looks every other snap, it looks like, I think Dallas Turner is going to raise some chaos for some of those quarterbacks in the NFC North. Another one that I really like, though, and Terrion Arnold is one that you mentioned. I thought that was a home run for the Detroit Lions at 24. I still liked Quinyon Mitchell at 22 for the Philadelphia Eagles. And we're talking about Vic Fangio, now that defensive scheme going in there. And I think there's a lot of scheme versatility for Quinyon Mitchell. And I know that the 2 veteran cornerbacks that they had, James Bradbury and Darius Slay, both didn't look quite as effective as they did the season prior. But now you reinfuse that cornerback specific position with Quinyon Mitchell, and they even did some nice things, with Cooper DeJean.
Yeah, I was going to say, I imagine you like that pick too.
I thought that Cooper DeJean was going to go in round 1. Howie Roseman gets him in round 2, and they trade up with a division rival in the Washington Commanders, which is even more surprising because that was a position of need for the Commanders. Still think the Commanders had a great draft, but very, I would have loved it more if they would have just stayed there and took Cooper DeJean. But point is, Howie Roseman, I think retooled this secondary very quickly in 2024.
Yeah, I think a lot of great defensive moves, and teams were able to capitalize on the value that fell down the board, right? No defensive player in the first 14 picks, which, most of those early picks I can't fault. I think the Falcons are probably the one that you could point to. Yeah, they could have picked a defensive player, but most of them, the Jets, the Titans, they picked offensive tackles. The Titans picked J.C. Latham a little earlier than expected, but still a top 20 guy for me. And I think, because Joe Alt went to number 5, that accelerated the timeline for a lot of the tackles, right? So, I can see it for sure. And let's talk about some of those offensive fits, though. Brock Bowers going to the Raiders. I don't think anyone had that on their bingo card, which is pretty interesting because I think, he's one of those positionless prospects who, the more you think about his profile, the more he can fit a lot of different offenses with how he can play, right? So with the Raiders, with Brock Bowers, I know that was a very intriguing pick. What do you think about that fit there? Because I like it a lot personally. I know people were looking at it on the surface. Michael Mayer, right? Like, what happens with him now? I don't think they're redundant, though. I think Brock Bowers, we've talked about it before, is a guy who kind of similarly to how the Bills viewed Dalton Kincaid last year when they took him round 1. Bowers is a guy who can play big slot. He can kind of be that half tight end, half receiver. You can scheme him opportunities. And you got Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers who can kind of take the pressure off with their ability to separate and win independently. So Brock Bowers as a pure weapon, right? A positionless weapon. I like that fit a lot. They still need a QB, but I think that weapons cast is looking very strong. What did you think about that?
Oh, you hit hit the nail on the head there, Ian, with I think that Michael Penix going at 8 maybe threw the entire draft off for the Las Vegas Raiders, right? They were probably expecting either Penix or Nix to be there at 13, and all of a sudden 6 quarterbacks go in the first 12 picks right in front of them, and they're on the clock at 13. Like, okay, well, what do we do? And you have a generational type tight end prospect that falls in your lap, who I think is a top 5 football player in this class. He just, plays a position that isn't highly valued on draft day. So you get yourself a hell of a football player, an offensive weapon. And I know that they like what they have, obviously, with Devontae Adams, and even Jacoby Myers has a lot of formation versatility and is a very nice complementary number 2, but they didn't really have that solidified number 3 guy in the passing attack. And now you get an ace who creates mismatches all over the football field in Brock Bowers, and is a dynamic rack threat. In comparison to what you have with Jacoby Myers and Devontae Adams, and I wouldn't call either of them like hyper, elite rack threats. So this gives the Raiders offense a new element completely. It's just now, are you going to be able to maximize that ceiling with what you currently have in your quarterback room in 2024? Maybe not, but long term, I'm completely okay. If you thought that Bowers is a big time difference maker at tight end, yeah, Michael Mayer's a nice player and can still rotate in and contribute in the offense, in particular in 12 personnel sets. And I think that they want to run the football a lot with Antonio Pierce and Zamir White. I think that that's the type of brand of football that the Raiders probably want to play in 2024. So taking a tight end there, it from a fantasy perspective, maybe it caps the ceiling a little bit because of the quarterback situation. Football fit, I love it.
Yeah, for sure. And you look at, what you can do with those outside zone runs, sweeps, get Brock Bowers out in motion. He's such a good blocker on those looks. He's not quite as good in line, so that's kind of where his value is limited. But if you can get him out in space, the dude is a mauler. He's tenacious. I love his blocking ability within that phase. So I think that does improve the dynamism of your offense within that lens too. So a fun pick as well. Another fun offensive pick was Brian Thomas Jr. going to the Jacksonville Jaguars. This was a fit that we kind of theorized a couple times, but the Jaguars ended up trading back from 17 to 23, and they still got their guy, which is pretty impressive. What are your thoughts on this one? Because I know me personally, like going back to Trevor Lawrence in his days at Clemson, he always loved the big-bodied receivers on the boundary. T. Higgins, right, playing in college with him, Justin Ross a little bit. So looking at what he had in college, and he's lacked that at Jacksonville for a long time. Christian Kirk was kind of his wide receiver one last year. Zay Jones had a flash in the pan season where he was really good for a little bit. But I think now you truly have that size speed athlete who can win down the field, who can win vertically, who can separate consistently with his size, but also box out at the catch point, attack the football at its highest point where only he can get it. And that's a weapon that Trevor Lawrence hasn't had very often. So I really like the potential with Brian Thomas Jr. in Jacksonville. What are your thoughts on that one?
So we talked about it when we were talking about one of our previous PFM scouting episodes. The choice between Brian Thomas Jr. or Quinyon Mitchell for this team specifically. Mitchell goes one pick before Brian Thomas Jr. and now Thomas is a Jacksonville Jaguar. I love the fit for Trevor Lawrence. You're absolutely right. The vertical element, while I still think Calvin Ridley's a good player last year and was heavily utilized, it didn't fully maximize what I think is the ceiling for Trevor Lawrence. And now I think you've got really two very quality slot options in Christian Kirk. And don't sleep on Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram actually saw the second most snaps in the slot last year of any tight end in the NFL and was very productive and has been productive for 2 straight seasons for Jacksonville. Now you have not one, but 2 vertical options in Gabe Davis. But of course, Brian Thomas Jr. has a much higher ceiling. I think he can be your prototypical alpha wide receiver one. I think we want to see a little bit more as far as his expansion of the route tree, right? Maybe in some of the ways that Jacksonville can use him in that offense. But entering this offense from day number 1, he instantly gives this offense a ton of vertical juice. I like Gabe Davis, nice player, but I think that Thomas gives you everything that Davis has, but has a much higher ceiling. So I'm super happy about Brian Thomas and for Trevor Lawrence getting himself a type of vertical weapon that has elite physical traits.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the key with Gabe Davis is that, yeah, he has that vertical ability for sure, but there are some things that he can't do that Thomas can do. I think Thomas Jr., a lot of the appeal with him is that he is that elite vertical threat, but you can also scheme him touches on the rack, on the horizontal plane as a rack threat. I think he had some really nice crafty reps where he could, create space in that line. He's got the long strider speed to really erase angles. And then at the same time too, I think the route running building blocks are there to expand the route tree as well. So a ton of upside with that pick. Very excited to see what they can do. A few other picks in round 1 that stood out to me. Graham Barton going to Tampa Bay. Loved the value there. I think he strengthened their interior. I know you love that pick for sure. Great player. I think if he sticks at center, I see just from a body type comparison, athleticism, some Alex Mack to his game. I think he'd be a very good player there. Troy Fautanu to the Steelers. They nailed that offensive line pick, and they really strengthened the offensive line all the way around. Troy Fautanu was my 13th overall player. Yeah, man, they spent like 3 picks on it in the first 4 rounds. So they're like, yeah, we know this is a problem. We're going to fix it. Don't worry. worry. And they did. So, I mean, we don't know if they have, we still have to see it play out on the field, but on paper, it looks a lot better. And there were a few other picks as well. I know late in round one, you had Darius Robinson to the Cardinals, which was intriguing, a little rich for me for him. I'm curious about the scheme fit there, if they're going to play him at 3-tech or 5-tech or maybe more edge. But I think he's a hybrid DL who can increase the flexibility of your unit, which is very good. They got Baltimore got Nate Wiggins at number 30, was my 30th overall player. So that value hit the nail on the head. The recovery speed, the route recognition, the playmaking, all very good traits with him. The Panthers traded up to 32 to get Xavier Legette. So they have a size speed athlete there who's got some rack chops, who's got some good blind spot awareness as a route runner. Real quick, before we expand to the rest of the draft, though, I think one of the more surprising picks in round one was San Francisco taking Ricky Pearsall. I don't think anyone had that on their card, but I can see the upside there because, I feel like we've been through this song and dance before. I feel like we just give Kyle Shanahan the benefit of the doubt at this point, right? Because there are times when, to be fair, it's not exclusive to every position. Like there are a few third round running backs that he's taken that just haven't done anything. And then you're like, what's Shanahan doing? But then all of a sudden they're back in the Super Bowl again. So it's like, you can't really fault him. But Ricky Pearsall was a player. He was, I think, in the 50s for me. So a little rich for him, not like a massive reach, but a guy who I don't think he plays to the testing numbers very often. Not very often. I think, there are just lapses sometimes, right? He ran a 4.4 around, he had an over 40-inch vertical. I didn't always see that kind of acceleration channeled out of breaks as a rack threat, as a route runner on the vertical plane. There were times when I would have liked him to stack a little bit more easily. And he does show that on film at times, but it's just, I want it to be a little more consistent. That said, surgical route runner, very good change of direction, very good hip flexibility, very good nuance and efficiency with his movements. And then at the catch point, I mean, this dude has some of the best instincts and hand strength that you will see. I mean, he's a very reliable receiver. Your thoughts on that one? Because I think that one caught some people off guard, but with the whispers about Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk potentially being on the trade block, you can't take anything for granted.
Right. So you're thinking immediately, well, does this mean that Deebo or Brandon Ayuk are on the move, at some point during the 2024 NFL draft, and neither of them end up getting dealt? So what you have now is a receiver room that still has its two top producers and are very dynamic in their own right, in their own ways. And then Ricky Pearsall can kind of plug the gaps in whatever way you want to try to deploy and use him for Kyle Shanahan, which I love. And I love his long-term outlook if Deebo or Brandon Ayuk end up being on the move after this year or next year or whatever. But you keep filling the well with playmakers. And I think in 11 personnel, which in those type of sets, Ricky Pearsall is an upgrade over Jawan Jennings or Ronnie Bell, and I think gives this offense a little bit more juice, a little bit more versatility, and a lot of creative ways because of how effective Ricky Pearsall is as a route runner. I think he can actually get better and more explosive and more consistent sometimes, creating separation. But the flashes are certainly there. The movement skills are there. The nuance is there. And the ball skills certainly there in spades. So whether it's going to be Pearsall as your wide receiver 2 or 3 for the foreseeable future, I think it's a great scheme fit with Kyle Shanahan. I love the long-term outlook for Ricky Pearsall and even Brock Purdy, because you're giving him another very talented pass catcher along with George Kittle. We didn't even mention his name or Christian McCaffrey. Yeah. So this 49ers offense somehow got better than what they even were last season, which was exceptional.
Yeah, it's one of those things where if there's a path where he can be integrated effectively early on, and I think there is with Pearsall, right? He's a phenomenal route runner. He's a very good functional athlete, right? At times you want the verticality to show up a little more consistently, but it's there, it exists. And then his alignment versatility, like you said, I mean, he played the boundary, the slot, movement Z, off motions, pretty much any usage that you need. And he's willing to get his nose dirty as a blocker too, which I think is a good plus in that scheme as well. He's never going to be an elite run blocker. He's not the biggest guy, but he can hold his own there. So I think that also provides value for him. So, it's one of those picks where, it caught me off guard, but I can see a path where San Francisco makes it worthwhile. So it'll be fun to see the outlook there. Let's move on to day 2. We'll continue with weapons and landing spots in the offensive side of the ball, and then we'll wrap up with some our favorite drafts overall. But the wide receiver class, man, it's always going to generate a lot of the hype, right? Because there's so much talent. But some of the landing spots on day 2 were very intriguing for me. Keon Coleman going to Buffalo right away. I know Buffalo had a chance to pick a round 1 guy, but they traded back a couple times and still got Coleman. I think as an alpha with some big slot utility, you've mentioned before, you think he could transition to a big slot role. if that ends up being the case for him, they drafted Dalton Kincaid for that similar role. So I wonder how they're going to coexist.
Right.
But I do think there is some upside as an X on the boundary. So hopefully he can reach that. Ladd McConkey going to the Chargers, I think exactly what they needed with Quentin Johnson not quite living up to, his expectations as a rookie. And I also think he might allow Johnson to play more within his sphere. Maybe they use him in a similar light as Rashee Rice, more of a design touches guy who can use that long strider explosion and twitch to generate rack as well. So that's an exciting one for sure. Jalen Polk going to New England. No more analysis needed there. That's a fun one. I love that one. A.D. Mitchell falling to the Colts at 52 overall. That was surprising to me, but I think the verticality, he obviously has the size speed combination. He's got the route running ability, right? I think there are times when some of his breaks can be a little more efficient, but you're working with a guy who, for his size, has all of the twitch, the flexibility, the throttle control, the micro movements that you're looking for to put DBs in a blender if he can properly apply it. And then at the same time, too, he's got that. He does flash instincts at the catch point as well, which fits very well with A-Rich. And there were some other fits later on that were very intriguing too. I know Malachi Corley going to the Jets was kind of a slight reach on my board, but an elite rack threat. I think underneath Mike Williams and Garrett Wilson, that can be very good. The Bengals getting Jermaine Burton at 80th overall, that was fun. I think if he can stay on a straight and narrow off the field, right, there were some character concerns that were kind of whispered in the lead up to the draft. But if they can keep him focused on football, if they can keep him on the right path, he can be an incredibly good player. Because his tape, if you don't put character concerns, that's top 50 tape. I mean, the way that first off, the athletic profile that he has, the speed, the bend, the flexibility, the very smooth motion, right? And how he applies it as a route runner. I mean, he can be surgical, right? He can put DBs just in mayhem, in pandemonium. And then he's got very strong hands at the catch point too. I think he had one of the lowest drop rates over the past 2 years. So, playing with Jalen Milroe, who was, he improved down the stretch for Alabama, but was a little inconsistent as a passer overall with his accuracy and his field vision. So a lot of yards went untested. But Jermaine Burton has that upside. Jalen McMillan going to the Buccaneers too. I think he could be an instant wide receiver 3. And I'm maybe boosting up the Buccaneers a little too much because he's a Buccaneers fan. He's going to get a swelled head here, but I like McMillan a lot. I think that's a great fit for him. I think he's got the speed, the route running chops for sure. If he can stay healthy, that's the key thing because he hasn't always been available. But day 2, the weapons on the offensive side of the ball, running back, receiver, tight end. I know this is your bread and butter. So what were some of your favorite fits here?
Ladd McConkey. Yeah. When the Los Angeles Chargers decided to go with Joe Alt at number 5 overall, which, by the way, not a bad pick at all. Like, Joe Alt is a dude.
He's different. He's different.
Yeah, he is definitely different. And you add that, they already have Rashawn Slater slated in at left tackle. We'll see how they decide to go ahead and have all those pieces fit along the offensive line unit. But certainly Joe Alt's going to come in day number 1 and have an impact and bring the type of physicality and brand of football that Harbaugh wants to play now in Los Angeles. The thing is, though, he didn't neglect his quarterback. He went and got, I think, the best separator in this class with Ladd McConkey, or at least maybe has the ceiling to be the most consistent best separator in this class. I understand that his production profile wasn't excellent at Georgia, but the way that they used him, as you mentioned, as like a rack threat, but his not only his release package, but his ability to just drop people off at a nearby bus stop about 20 yards away sometimes at the break point with his creativity. One of the best out route runners I've ever watched on tape. Like, he is phenomenal setting folks up heading into the break point. It's fantastic, creates a ton of separation consistently. And that's what they need. Like, you purged over 200 targets from last year's team with Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, and on Austin Eckler. Now no longer on the football team. You bring in Ladd McConkey, who can create separation no matter where you want to line him up on the formation. You can just get him manufacture touches for Rack's ability. And he's only competing with, you already mentioned, Quentin Johnson and like Josh Palmer for targets. I think he's going to be the option that's consistently open the most for Justin Herbert. I know that they're going to also dial up a lot of play action looks. He's got the vertical speed to be able to threaten DBs on the vertical plane and even hit some of those big home runs. And Justin Herbert is more than capable of delivering on those big shots down the football field. I think Ladd McConkey was a great addition to this receiver room for what they needed, and they're in Los Angeles.
Yeah, the biggest thing is going to be, can he stay healthy, right? Because there were some times in college, like the durability, and I hate that we always ask that question because it's one of those things where especially at the NFL level, sometimes it catches us off guard. Some guys who had injury issues in college end up staying healthy. Some guys who never missed a game in their life end up, having injury concerns that can snowball, right? So it's one of those things you can only predict to a certain degree. But there were times where durability was questioned for Ladd McConkey at college. Yeah, where he either missed games or had to leave early, right? So if he can stay on the field, I see some Greg Jennings there. I know people like to throw in the Cooper Kupp, Wes Welker. No, come on. We don't need to do that. I was trying to, for my comps, my wide receiver comps, I try to look at, movement style, right? Obviously athletic profile, measurements to a degree, because a lot of times the physical profile that you're playing with dictates how you move and how you win and things like that. Sure. Right? So Greg Jennings to me had that amped up movement, right? He's got the vertical speed, but he could win over the middle of the field too, right? He was a guy that didn't always have to take the top off the defense, just find those creases and just really just surgically ply yourself in. And I see a lot of that with Ladd McConkey. I think he's a guy who does have the vertical speed, like you said, and that forces defenders to respect him on the vertical plane, right? You can't press too much on that cushion because then he can blow right by you. So you got to pedal a little bit. You got to maintain depth. But then right when you do, he can put you in a blender with those stop and goes, with those double moves as well, those post corners. He's got all of that in his arsenal with that flexibility, channeling that acceleration out of breaks. And he's got pretty strong hands at the catch point too. So I think he's a very QB friendly player. I know some people had him as high as wide receiver 4 in this class. So that respect is not unwarranted, and going to the Chargers, the exact weapon that they needed. We got about 5 minutes left, so we talked about playmakers. We talked about round 1. Derek, your 3 favorite draft classes out of this one. I know this year in general, it felt a little bit stronger across the board to me. There weren't too many classes that I could pick apart and say, I wouldn't have done that. But what were the top 3 classes for you that you really liked that stood out to you? And then I'll give my 3.
All of our PFN grades that we did across the board, there was only one that was below a C, and it was from me, the Atlanta Falcons. So I'm sorry, Atlanta. I don't mean to be a harsh grader, I guess, but
he's a Bucks fan. You knew it was going to happen. No, I'm kidding.
See, now that's going to go ahead and cast all kinds of doubt anyway. But I got you. So one class that I loved though was the Baltimore Ravens. Whether you liked or loved or were indifferent about the Nate Wiggins pick, still a very good cornerback prospect that I think figures into that secondary. The rich get richer on the defensive side of the football for Baltimore. Roger Rosengarten, like what he's going to be able to do. I think that there's a chance that he flexes inside to maybe fill that gap with, I know that they've lost Kevin Zeitler and I think John Simpson along the interior of that offensive line this year. I think that somehow, some way, Roger Rosengarten is going to find his way on the football field in 2024. Very good football player. Adisa Isaac, I was surprised he fell all the way to round 3. The Ravens certainly could use another edge rusher. They don't really have a dominant edge pass rusher. I mean, I like what I've seen from Odafe Oweh during his career, but certainly I believe they may have lost Jadeveon Clowney, if I'm not mistaken, from last year's
he
roster.
Went to the Panthers. Yep.
Right. So now you add, I think, a very productive, rotational piece along the edge who can get after the quarterback. Love Isaac. Devontae Walker, real quick, great vertical threat, needs to hold on to the ball more and expand his route tree, get a little bit more physical too at the line of scrimmage. And TJ Tampa, I was like sitting there pounding the table for a while, like, why is this guy not coming off the board? Maybe something medical, but TJ Tampa, another corner, another secondary guy, physical presence at the catch point, long arms, I think has nice diagnosis ability. I think he can factor in some capacity, even if it's not a large role early in his career. I think the Ravens got themselves a very good football player in the 4th round, and even a future option for Derrick Henry, Rasheen Ali. Really like his game out of Marshall. Had some injury concerns, and certainly, there's portions of his game that I think you can poke some holes in, but ultimately, I think a very bursty, downhill, powerful runner that can factor in nicely down the road behind Derrick Henry in this dominant Baltimore Ravens rushing attack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they really nailed it. I think they got a lot of value. I think TJ Tampa in particular was a guy who was a day 2 for me. Adisa Isaac was a top 50 player for me. So love the value that they got. Did you have 2 more that you want to hit on real quick? Or
Yeah, real quick. I mean, we already talked about the Pittsburgh Steelers. Mm-hmm. They're probably still going to draft a lineman at some point this summer because it just seemed like that was all they were doing in this NFL draft. They said that they knew that this was a need. They go get Fatano, Zach Frazier in the 2nd round, who I really like for the interior of that offensive offensive line. And then Mason McCormick was one of my FCS sleepers or FBS sleepers, excuse me, that I really like his athletic profile, even though he didn't play to that athleticism quite as much as I would like against his lower level competition, but still a nice interior line prospect. Roman Wilson, I think, immediately factors into that receiver room alongside George Pickens, nice explosive vertical threat. And then Peyton Wilson, medical concerns probably dropped him all the way to the end of round 3. I thought he was in the conversation for number 1 overall off-ball linebacker prospect in this class, and they get him at the tail end of the 3rd round. I know that they just signed Patrick Queen, but all of a sudden, if Peyton Wilson can stay healthy, man, oh man, you just got a lot faster and a lot more dynamic at the linebacker position behind that very talented unit up front as far as getting after the quarterback.
Yeah, I think all of those picks, the Steelers were going to be one of mine, so I'm in agreement there. I think they bolstered the offensive line. They got that wide receiver that fits the scheme really well. I think a separator who's got some good utility as a blocker and a catch threat too. And then they got some guys later in day 3 like Ryan Watts, who can play corner safety, really good scheme fit again on defense.
I like Ryan
with
Watts.
That size and that speed. So really good dart throw late in the draft, right? And 2 other teams for me, the Chiefs, I thought they got great value again. Xavier Worthy. I would have liked a guy that was a little more complimentary at that point, but Xavier Worthy was my 27th overall player. He was my wide receiver 5. So getting him and Andy Reid. Andy Reid is a mad genius. He can make it work. I love that fit. They got Jaden Hicks and Jared Wiley on day 3, who were 2 very good value deals, man. I think Wiley can legitimately be the successor to Travis Kelce. He's got that fluidity. He's got good hands at the catch point, really good body control, very good alignment versatility, which plays right into Reid's playbook again. So I love that. And then Jaden Hicks is more of a box safety, but I do think he has enough range and versatility to cover 2 high as well. He can play the slot and off man and carry guys up the field, up the seam too. So I think he could be a tight end eraser with some additional versatility beyond that. And they have some contracts expiring at safety in 2025. So I really like that fit as a future-minded move. And then the Washington Commanders, I got to shout them out again. I probably would have taken Drake May over Jaden Daniels, but I love the scheme fit with Jaden Daniels, with Cliff Kingsbury. I think that vertical-oriented attack is very strong with him. He's got the weaponry already with Terry McLaurin. Jahan Dotson can maybe rebound a little bit with that quarterback in the room. You strengthen the offensive line. You got Brandon Coleman, who was one of my favorite sleepers in round 3. I projected him to guard more often, but I do think he can play tackle. I think he is athletic enough. He's big enough. He's got pretty good technique, experience, and still pretty young. He started playing football full-time as a high school senior. So a lot more growth left to endure. And then Ben Sinnott, Johnny Newton, Mike Sanders still, come on. Put that round 2 in the Hall of Fame. That's what I'm saying. That's already there, man. I love the idea with Johnny Newton in Dan Quinn's scheme. Dan Quinn, a lot of 5-man fronts where he can move guys around. Johnny Newton can play 3-tech. He can play 5-tech. Really wherever you need him to. He can play NASCAR fronts off the line and use that speed to power, but very flexible as well. Very good hands. Mike Sanders still one of my favorite defenders in the draft with his slot ability, but he can play boundary. He can play 2 high if you need him to. Very physical, very intelligent zone defender, very physical man as well. He's got the micro movements, the speed, the explosion. And then Ben Sinnott, man. I mean, that guy was my tight end too, pretty much run away by the end of it. I think his ability to run routes with that fluidity, very, very smooth through direction changes, explosive and agile, but in a way where it's layered into his game pretty seamlessly, where you don't always, it doesn't catch your eye quite like Brock Bowers, but this dude is one of the best functional athletes out there. And he compounds it with usage versatility, with blocking ability, route running nuance, and efficient footwork, and then very strong hands and rack ability as well. So I think he can be an immediate game changer and a potential high-end tight end later on. So big fan of those 3 drafts, but in summation, so many details to go over with the 2024 NFL draft. I thought it was a pretty strong class across the board. Any closing thoughts, Derek, before we send our listeners off?
No, that it's just been a lot of fun to finally get some landing spots and be able to dig into these, teams and their outlooks and their roles. And there's so much more to discuss, but I felt like we covered a lot in a short amount of time. And I'm in agreement with you. The Washington Commanders had themselves a nice little draft. So no more final thoughts. Just it's been a pleasure to share the mic with you throughout the months leading up to the 2024 NFL draft. And I know your attention shifting to the 2025 class already.
Yep. I'm going to take a vacation at some point point for sure. But don't worry. But we will be transitioning at some point. The grind never truly stops. So we'll be turning the page at some point. But we have already turned the page on the site. We're getting initial lists up. We got our initial top 100. I actually wrote it up yesterday. It will be changing a lot, but this is just our initial list to kind of give you an introduction to the 2025 class. We rolled the MDS over. So if you want to do some early mock drafts, if you're that much of a sicko, that option is open for you. You can do some 2025 mocks just a couple days after the draft. And then we've also got a lot of content coming up after the vacation. We'll be doing scouting reports, and we'll be getting our feet wet there. So a lot left in store still for the 2025 cycle. We are going to be getting at it early. But in the meantime, thank you all again for listening. We really appreciate all that you do for us. Just tuning in and being a part of the conversation. It's very much appreciated. And we'll be continuing the podcast. I don't know if the schedule is going to change. Obviously, not a ton to talk about in the off season, right? So we might parse it down a little bit, but we will be back with more draft stuff. You know we will. And soon enough, we'll have plenty more to talk about with the 2025 class. So until next time, everyone, thank you. Peace out. Have a good one.